This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. You'll hear me talk to, of course, Chen here on this episode, and I do have to admit here right at the very beginning how Finch and Linnet, I know upon my first listen was one of those songs that I didn't really get until I actually saw a production of Sweeney Todd, and then it kind of clicked as far as like how this actually fits into the show. Otherwise, when you're just giving this a first listen as a teenager without reading the plot synopsis first, it just kind of comes out of nowhere as this woman is singing about birds for seemingly no reason. Not that birds shouldn't be sung about, but, I wanted to get back to the murder. I do want to give a shout out, in perfect timing actually this week, I did get a message on Twitter from Shelby Youngest. I had this realization during your most recent episode with Tom Sesma, when Tom mentioned how satisfying it is to sing the word home. Nearly every character sings about home at some point. Johanna and Anthony's last sung line is "and then home someday," whereas Sweeney and Lovett sing about home early in the show. It's almost as though they then drift further from the true concept of home the longer the show goes on. Spoiler, the beggar woman's last line is a lullaby about her husband. He'll be coming here again, home again, before Sweeney cuts her off. She then goes on to say, "I finished my production of this show weeks ago and I'm still discovering new things about it all the time. Really hope I have the chance to play Johanna again someday." I would love to know what you did to prepare for the song Finch and Linnet. It's something that Christina and I do question here in this week's episode, so definitely write in again if you have something you want to say about that. But there's no sense making this go longer than it needs to be, so let's jump into my conversation with Chen about Finch and Linnet.
Finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how is it you sing? How can you jubilate sitting in...
Chen, welcome back. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was really interesting to get into Sweeney Todd because I hadn't really known it super well before. So, which I know is like a huge glaring hole in my theater knowledge.
I think it's fine. There's only so much that we can actually, consume as humans. I think what is interesting is we're going to be talking about a song. I don't know. I maybe I'm making this up, but from my experience, it's not like anyone's favorite song from Sweeney Todd. But it does serve a pretty big purpose for us because this is new for you coming into Sweeney Todd. I guess, what are your feelings towards the show and that you've done a deeper dive on it?
So, well, I guess I sort of ruined it for myself where I knew the plot of, I think I had tried to get into Sweeney Todd earlier. And so I knew the plot. So all the plot twists that happen, I already knew what they were, which was now I wish I hadn't because I'm what do people think of the beggar woman that just keeps randomly coming in?
Random showing up, yeah.
This was probably one of the few songs I actually did know. And I think it's probably because it sounds different than sort of everything else that's going on. Because everything else is sort of like a little darker, a little more manic, a little like this is almost like a breath of fresh air in the tonal structure of the show, which is ironic because she is very trapped and not getting fresh air. The show is interesting in a way where I feel like I'm not able to fully grasp everything that's happening in it. It's obviously doing a lot, but trying to articulate what it's doing is really difficult.
I was talking to another guest here, which now I can't remember if it's going to be before you or after you, but whatever. I was talking to a guest here. We were kind of having the same conversation about how, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, every time I watch a production, so I listen to the albums again, there's always something new that I pick up. It's like, oh, that's a good big piece of foreshadowing, either musically or lyrically over here. Or it's like, oh, I never noticed that happened over here. Or I see a production like, oh, that's interesting staging. That's really great how they're blocking this. So it's a dense show. There's a lot of stuff that you can jump into, talk about, and explore through this. Have you seen even any of the filmed productions at all?
I saw I think it's the 82 one with Angela Lansbury and George Hearn. I saw part of that Patti LuPone, George Hearn concert production. And then I also watched the movie. I
Right.
actually don't think I finished the movie, but I watched most of it.
I mean, you're fairly well versed in if you've seen multiple productions then here. I think that's the other thing too, like just talking about where we're at here in the show right now. It really is interesting musically how we have gone through a bunch of different musical styles
Right.
telling this story, right? Like we're like doom and gloom at the very beginning. We're like
Yeah.
to let you know, like this is going to be a serious show. Like we're staying here, and then it's like we're throwing over to Miss Lovett and her like manic energy. So it's like, okay, there's a little bit of comedy that's going on here. He's found his razors here again. The ballad of Sweeney Todd is played again to kind of shuffle along the plot, and basically to hide a scene change that's happening here. And now we're meeting Johanna. So we know that this is Sweeney's daughter. We've already met Anthony a little bit, but here we have like this soprano singer singing this like lovely aria here kind of in the beginning of the first act. And it's telling us a bit at least about her character. But I want to know, like, I want to explore this a little bit in depth, which is from this song, at least, without thinking of anything else in the show right now. Like, how do you take Johanna as a character?
So the first reaction is basically she is like both Cosette from Les Mis and Rapunzel from essentially any
Right.
version of Rapunzel, but I guess like Into the Woods comes to mind also because it's also Sondheim, and also she pretty much does the same thing in Into the Woods. And it is very like, oh yeah, she's just the typical, random girl who's locked away and unhappy with her life and wants to leave but can't, and presumably some guy is going to come save her is pretty much what you assume she is, which is not completely off base, but I suppose like not the entire story either.
Yeah, like it's hard. Like this is something I know that we've talked about already on the show this season. But her mother, or Sweeney Todd's wife, is, even though, sorry, spoiler alert, is the beggar woman in the show and is revealed to be so at the very, very end. We don't, as an audience, like really get to know more about her, about Lucy specifically. We know she was beautiful. We know that she was impetuous a little bit. End of sentence. Like, there's not much more we know about this person. And Johanna, at the very least, gets an entire song to herself, and gets to do more stuff in the later on in the show as well. But she is still kind of there to be saved, which I was going to say is kind of like a Victorian literature trope a little bit, which is true. But like, you still have like Jane Austen and the Brontes writing in the Victorian era too, who had better female characters than this. So.
Right. Well, did you look into, I think it's called A String of Pearls. It was one of the original stories that involved Sweeney Todd, because Joanne, like in those stories, Sweeney Todd was just flat out murderer, like serial killer.
Yeah, didn't have a family, right?
Yeah. And there was a character of Johanna in that, and she was much more proactive. I mean, she was also completely different, but she had, it was her lover was like lost or something, like no one knew what happened to him. And so she went out trying to look for him. At some point she dressed up as a man to like try to get places or something. I don't quite remember the details. She was the one that was like, no, there's something wrong here. I need to go figure out what it is. So she left like the comfort of her home to go find out. And most of the characters are different. Like basically the only two characters that are the same from that are Sweeney and Lovett, but with different motivations completely as well.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, because as of this recording, I've not actually read The String of Pearls, but the Judge and the Beetle are like created for this show, or were created for the play that this musical is based on, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the play drew specifically from Count of Monte Cristo, in terms of like the revenge story and like coming back to ruin the lives of the people who like ruined your life and all that. So I think that is the first iteration of those characters.
It is interesting though that I guess the whole creative team was taking elements of what had been in those previous stories and kind of like pepper it through the narrative here, but still don't really have her be much more than a prop, I guess, throughout most of this.
But I also think it's interesting how they treat women in this show, because on one hand, I actually say that the women in the show are more interesting than their counterparts. Like, I don't know if it's just because of how musical theater canon is and how people celebrate like, female musical theater stars I'd say more than male musical theater stars. But I feel like the show, even though it's called Sweeney Todd, it's always delineated by like, oh, the Sweeney Todd with Angela Lansbury or the Sweeney Todd with Patti LuPone. Like, I don't feel like I hear as much like, oh, the original Sweeney Todd with Glenn Carriou. It's more like Angela Lansbury is the one that people talk about. And I mean, I'm sure you get into this in other episodes, but I do feel like Mrs. Lovett is a little more complex than Sweeney. Like Sweeney sort of only really has one thing that he's doing. It's his psychosis that's more interesting, but Mrs. Lovett has like multiple motivations. And like, so that is a little more interesting, I'd argue, than Sweeney's motivations. And Johanna also, like, Anthony is also very simple, which is really interesting for someone who has, you know, sailed the seas and like seen the world and everything. And he is like still so naive and innocent and like there is good in everything and all that. Whereas Johanna almost seems world weary already by the time that we get to her. She's pretty messed up just by the fact that she was like raised by the judge and stuff. So I think there is actually like her character, I'd say, is also more interesting than Anthony's, but she just doesn't get a chance to show that.
It's interesting that you bring that up now. And now my mind is racing because I guess this is kind of why I love this show, is that every single song I kind of learn something new. There's that word that Sweeney sings near the beginning, right? About even talking about his time in London, where he himself was naive. Like he didn't really know the world necessarily. But I think that could be applied to Anthony very easily. Like he is naive, whereas I don't think you can actually use that for Johanna, at least not 100%. She is a little bit more understanding, like, hey, and I know that's kind of like the not even subtext of this song that we're going to talk about. Like, I am a caged bird. I understand that. So I have to make a decision. Do I escape or do I stay here? And what does that say about me, whether I choose either one? So I think she can almost, you could even play this. I think you could like play this up a little bit about her seeing Anthony like, oh, you are my ticket out of here. And whether she actually loves him or not is like up to the actors to decide. But it's like, at the very least, I think you are the person that can get me out of this cage, and then I can make my own choice afterwards.
Right. I think the, I guess, like, quote unquote character of London is also interesting in this. And like, you know, the way that how Prince approached this show was the Industrial Revolution and how that creates people like Sweeney Todd and stuff. And then and like in the beginning, Anthony is singing about like, oh, there's no place like London. London's the greatest city in the world. Whereas Sweeney's like, yeah, there's no place like London because London is a cesspool of sin. And so you can see like Johanna has probably seen very little of London, but she's already like, I do not want to be here anymore. And in the end, when they're singing about like, we're going to travel, we're going to see all these things. And like, Anthony's like, and we'll come back to London. And she's just like, no, like she doesn't sing that part.
No, thank you. Yeah. I think there's a lot to that. I think the cool thing with Mrs. Lovett, of course, too, is just trying to unpack like what she actually knows, when she actually knows it, as well as like how much of a hand did she have in bringing Lucy into the judge's clutches, I guess. Right. Because there seems to be like some unsaid things about like she was the one who kind of brought her there. Even though that's never explicitly said, but it feels like that's the huge subtext. Like she led her there and then kind of knows what else is going on in the show, but pretends to be like this little daffy woman, but is anything but.
Right. Yeah.
But Johanna, of course, is our ingenue. She is the person that we're supposed to look at. She's the beautiful woman of this show here for ourselves. So yeah, Green Finch and Linnet Bird. I have to say, even on my first listen of this score, I remember this song coming on. It's like, what? What is this song? What is happening? For you, I guess, like as far as this song goes in general, like is this a song you enjoy? Is this like how do you look at this song?
I guess also to go more into like when I was going through Sweeney Todd, I think originally, you know, it's one of those things where it's like Sweeney Todd's a show I should know. Let me try to listen through this. And at that time, I picked up Patti LuPone version, the Michael Cerveris Patti LuPone version, and I think. The weird thing about Sondheim shows for me is I feel like I need some sort of entry point into them where it's like, okay, I like this song. Now I can listen to the rest of the cast album. And I couldn't find that in that version. But once I started listening to the original Broadway version, I think it was the orchestrations where it was like, whoa, this is, you know, coming out of nowhere. And with this song, it was interesting because, like we mentioned, everything else is very different up to this point. And also everything is very low, like pitch wise, it's very low. Even there's like a brief moment of a like vaguely soprano range in the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, but that's also sung by like the chorus. And so this is like the first time we hear an actual soprano singing it. So it did stand out to me. As far as how much I like it, it honestly gets stuck in my head all the time. Like, and that might have just been because I was listening to it a lot in preparation for this. It's interesting because I feel like Sondheim does a lot of songs where it's just like a descent into madness. And this is that adjacent, I guess. Like she's not quite descending into madness. Like arguably she's already mad.
Yeah. Descending into melancholy or something like that is what it feels like to me.
Like, I mean, I'd love to hear anyone who's like played Johanna talk about how they approach this song, because I feel like everybody does it differently. And the movie cuts out what I think is like the most interesting part of this song. I think it's interesting, like just how the actress, whoever they are, like decide to approach certain phrases and certain segments of this song.
Yeah. I think that's such a good call out about Sondheim writing songs about people slowly going mad. But I think this does feel like that. I think this could stand up against like Losing My Mind or Lazy Lunch almost. Getting to that final stanza of like, this is the choice I have to make. And it's something I need to figure it out now type of thing. I'm also like you though. I actually get this melody stuck in my head like all the time. I don't know why I think it's when a lot of time in the springtime when the birds start chirping and it's like that's when it kind of like have this weird sense memory.
That makes sense.
Not that I have much for green finches around me, but
I guess with this song there's also a question of like, is it diegetic? Because like when she gets carted off to the asylum, spoiler alert, you do hear her singing this and they do mention like, oh, she just keeps singing, like she's crazy, she just keeps singing. And that I think is a direct result of what happens in this song. Well, I guess to answer my own question, I don't think that she sung this song before, if she has like sung it in this timeline, because I feel like she does end up at a different place than the beginning once she gets to the end of the song, as far as her decisions, where she's going and all of that.
Hi there, everyone. Just Kyle breaking into the conversation here again to tell you about some of the people and organizations that help this show continue to go. First and foremost, I would like to tell you that if you would like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can go and leave a rating and review in whichever app you use for podcasts. It still is one of the best ways for discoverability, and I really appreciate those of you who have taken the time to do so already. If you would like to help financially, you can do so over at our Patreon page, but please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. That does mean that I need to give this huge thank you to the Suave Sextet of Jack, Todd, Carrie, Woody, Louise, and Christopher. Putting Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses. This week we're brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, so let's go and listen to one of our other great shows.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hi friends, Caitlin
and Shanika here from Get Checkered.
We are your favorite female co-hosted Formula One podcast based out of Calgary, Alberta.
Join us weekly as we share our hot takes on the Formula One world with a little bit of sass.
Catch the podcast on any streaming service by searching Get Checkered.
Whether you're a casual fan or an enthusiast,
we hope you enjoy the ride.
This week we're also brought to you by Park Power. In Alberta, you get to choose who to buy your internet, electricity, and natural gas from. Park Power has low overhead, which in turn allows them to offer low, competitive rates. Reach out for a no obligations comparison by emailing estimates@parkpower.ca. If you decide to switch, it's easy. It's really just a change to your billing, and you can feel good knowing you are helping to give back to our communities with your utilities bills. Learn more at parkpower.ca. This is how the song starts, by Johanna singing, "Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how is it you sing? How can you jubilate, sitting in cages, never taking wing? Outside the sky waits beckoning, beckoning just beyond the bars. How can you remain staring at the rain, maddened by the stars? How is it you sing? Anything, how is it you sing?"
Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how is it you sing? Oh, can you jubilate, sitting in cages, never taking wing? Outside the sky waits beckoning, beckoning, just beyond the bars. How can you remain staring at the rain, maddened by the stars? How is it you sing? Anything? How is it you sing? Green finch and linnet.
I mean, the obvious thing is that she very clearly like feels akin to these birds who are just stuck in cages. I mean, like to set the scene, I guess, a little more, in most stage productions, she's looking outside her window at like these birds in cages that are for sale, and they're still singing, they're still, doing their thing. The other part that's interesting about this show and how they talk about women is it's almost only in physical characteristics. Like we talked about in Maria about how when Sondheim was like, oh, when he writes a love song, he needs something of substance to write it about. But anytime Sweeney talks about his wife, it's always about how beautiful she is. Anytime the judge talks about either Johanna or Lucy, it's also about how beautiful they are. I mean, you have Pretty Woman as an entire song. And so it feels like Johanna is there to be seen and not heard. And so it's stifling for her because, like, even if she can't quote unquote fly, she can't even be heard either, because no one cares about her as a person outside of the fact that she's beautiful. Like, no one cares about what she has to say, like any of her opinions. And the birds at least get that. Like, they are able to express themselves vocally, and she does not.
Yeah, she literally does not have a voice. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the obvious metaphor that we've kind of already stated. Like, she sees herself so much like this bird in a cage, which is like a metaphor that's run through English literature for millennia at this point. But I think like that question that she's asked is like, how is it you sing? Right. It's like, I understand being caged up, but like, you still are caged and are still able to make this beautiful music. And I am caged and I can't. Like, I still don't understand. I don't understand how you have that choice.
Yeah. And I think the song in itself is also like her exploring that question of like, maybe this is how they sing. Maybe this is like why they're singing, and, how they're capable of doing this even while being caged. And again, like when she's singing in the asylum, it seems like she's figured that out for herself. Whether or not that's good for her, mental health is a different question. But she has at least come to some sort of conclusion regarding that. But I do think also the specific lines of how can you remain staring at the rain, maddened by the stars, is interesting, because that's what she assumes they do. Like, who knows if they're actually becoming maddened by the stars. It's obviously like she is experiencing that. And because she has nothing to do besides stare outside her window. Like, and this is where I guess the Rapunzel part comes in, is she doesn't even have anything to do inside her room. The only thing that's changing is anything that's outside her window, but the stars, I guess, like remain mostly the same. And so this also might be like, taking this reading a step too far, but during the day, she can at least watch things happening outside her window, and like things are changing. At night, presumably the streets are deserted. The only thing to look at is really the stars, because everything else is dark, and the stars are just there and they're not doing anything. So that's when she like truly feels the most confined, I'm assuming.
I like that. I mean, if you want to get into maybe crazy town, let me put on my like English major hat here for a second. I did a deep dive on this because I just wanted to see, because sometimes you never know, there could be hidden meanings that I just wasn't aware of. So I'm going to preface everything that we're about to jump into as being like, my opinion. I don't know if this is what was intended or not, but I like to think that maybe some of it was. I went up with the four birds that are mentioned here at the very beginning. So we have greenfinch, we have linnet bird, nightingale, and blackbird. So other than like both the greenfinch and the linnet bird literally being birds that were bought and sold in Victoria, England, like there's that reason. But anytime that there is a color associated, it's like, why did they pick that color? I feel like there's a reason why you pick that color. Why not red finch? Why not brown finch? We chose green finch. If you do take any stock in color theory, there might be a reason. Because green can be a bunch of different things. But in poetry, a lot of time, it's there just to either represent nature, like fertility, freshness, harmony, that kind of stuff. But another way that it's used, especially in like medieval literature and stuff like that, is ambition, which sometimes is called greed. And ambition is there. And jealousy is also what it's there to be used for as well. I have a feeling that might be why he chose that color of finch. It's like she's looking at them and is like trying to have this ambition or get this ambition of leaving. But also she's jealous of these birds too.
I like that.
That's my little theory. The linnet bird is the interesting one because every major poet used linnet bird in one of their poems. I found out, like, I didn't actually know this until I started researching this. Tennyson, Oscar Wilde, Robbie Burns, William Blake, and Wordsworth all wrote about linnet birds. It's like this popular bird that's in England. In fact, Wordsworth has a poem called The Green Linnet, which is, I think, even more fascinating about this. So here's me reading old poetry for you. 1 second here. One have I marked, the happiest guest in all this covert of the blessed. Hail to thee, far above the rest, in joy of voice and pinion. Thou linnet, in thy green array, presiding spirit here today, dost lead the revels of the May, and this is thy dominion. Just like a happy little bird who comes in May and sings and it's like, I own all of this. I like to think that maybe Sondheim knew some of these poems and like, I should use linnet bird in this lyric.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that. Like, I feel like a lot of his stuff does call back to older literature and everything.
I don't have like much on nightingales other than like nightingales are known to be beautiful singers. Like that is kind of the thing for nightingales. That's why they're used all the time.
Right.
So again, beautiful singer of the bird, as well as the person who is singing it on stage. The last one is the blackbird, which fits the meter. So, I mean, we have to be truthful here. So it works. And is also used in a ton of different things. Like a lot of old poetry and everything else uses blackbird. But I have to this is my theory. And this is the one where I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm super reaching, but I like to think this might be this like weird in-joke that Sondheim is using for it to actually refer to the nursery rhyme, Sing a Song of Sixpence, which is sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing, wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? If you want to see the breakdown of that nursery rhyme and what it's actually referring to, it has like nothing to do with what we're talking about. But I wonder if it's like, hey, these blackbirds baked in a pie. This show is about baking things into a pie. Why not use blackbird in this song?
Interesting. I think I'd believe that. I just looked up when the Beatles song was released, which is 1968. So that was before this. And I feel like some of the themes from that song could also be applied here. So possibly a double meaning there. Who knows?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Even though Sondheim, I think, claimed that he never really listened to popular music, but, you know, the Beatles are still the Beatles.
Heard it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The only other thing I wanted to mention about like this first opening bit here, too, I've actually been doing this more. And I mean, as we're recording this, have you seen on Twitter, I forget who shared it out, but one of the last songs Sondheim was working on, the lyric that he was writing?
I think I have seen it. I cannot recall what it was about.
It's kind of like about, I don't know, like our own mortality, which is like a recurring theme in his work. But I only noticed it in that one. It's like, oh, like the actual like meter and like the rhythm of it is really interesting. I only bring that up because what I found super interesting about this, so we have greenfinch, 2 syllables, linnet bird, 3 syllables, nightingale, 3 syllables, blackbird, 2. So it goes 2, 3, 3, 2. Don't know why, it's just the way that he decided to write this lyric, but
it's a parallel.
It's a parallel that we're doing. Yeah. Here's like a mirror image of themselves almost.
And I guess before we move on from this lyric, have you seen the 1982 recording it was the tour at that point of the Broadway.
Oh yeah, I have, yes.
And so the way that, and there's a lot of discourse about this on in the YouTube comments of this song, but the way that it is Betsy Jocelyn, the way that she sings this song is a little like more manic than most Johanna's play, particularly in the beckoning, because most people sing like beckoning, but she's like beckoning, like it sounds a little bit like a bird, and her movements are like that, which I think is a really interesting choice too, because the birds are probably her only friends. Like she doesn't have anyone else to talk to except the judge, and the judge is pretty creepy. Also, it's not clear if she knows she's adopted. Like I feel like she must know, but also if she doesn't talk to anyone, how would she? Right.
Yeah.
So like,
which makes it even creepier that he wants to marry her.
It's a weird thing going on there.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like the the Disney version of Cinderella, where it's like, oh, your only friends are birds and some mice. Like
they're gonna help her dress for the ball, except they're in cages.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, I have possibly this very unpopular opinion from that 82 film version. I don't really love that Johanna vocally very much, but I agree with the performance. I think the performance is like super interesting of her acting almost a little bit more bird-like and manic throughout that. But for whatever reason, I just don't love her high notes very much.
I think it does help bring out the fact that she is like, because most ingenues like kind of live a perfect, or like they don't live a perfect life, but they are still like a perfect character in terms of like romantic interest, and like they're always like everybody falls in love with them because of course they do, and like all that. But it's like she has major problems from being raised essentially in captivity. It's nice that that's like something that they brought forth in terms of like, yeah, she might be beautiful, but she might not also be completely mentally sound. Like she has other issues going on as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, if you want to like delve into a backstory here, she never knew her mother because her mother went crazy at a very young age for her. The judge is going to be the only person that was the adult in her life. He's kept her in like this locked room for the last 18 years, 16 years. I don't know. I forget how old she's actually supposed to be. It's a kind of a really sad, lonely life type of thing. And then only getting to see like London from her small little window here too. Like she's not going out on the town by herself.
Right.
And then the Beatle is probably the only other person she gets to talk to, and that must be like torture.
Right. Yeah. He's not exactly a super upstanding moral citizen either.
Right. So the bridge between the two sections goes like this. Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how is it you sing? Whence comes this melody constantly flowing? Is it rejoicing or merely hallowing? Are you discussing or fussing or simply dreaming? Are you crowing? Are you screaming?
Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how is it you sing? Whence comes this melody constantly flowing? Is it rejoicing or merely hallowing? Are you discussing or fussing or simply dreaming? Are you crowing? Are you screaming?
Well, this is like the section that's cut from the movie version.
Correct.
That I think is the most interesting. It's also the most interesting section, I think, to listen to how different actresses approach this, because now she's sort of like trying to come up with answers, because obviously the birds can't actually answer her as far as the like, how is it you sing? And I think it's interesting how it starts with whence comes the melody constantly flowing. The actual melody of the song does sort of like pick up the flow a little more. It almost like cascades over itself. And depending on who is playing her, like the following questions become either demanding or just like more confused or more puzzled. Like this sort of string of questions can go many different ways. But I think it's also like, why does the caged bird sing? Or like, how does the caged bird sing and all that? But it's also just like the bird's primary way of communication. Like they're not singing because they're happy necessarily. Like they're singing that's their vocalization for anything. Like for humans, like we speak and we sing, like, and those are two different things. But for birds,
well, there's also
like,
the other idea. The other idea I had too. I like it. It also depends on when the caged bird is caged. Because if you're born in captivity, you don't really know anything other than being in a cage, right? Not that it makes it right or anything, but still, like, you don't know that there's something necessarily better. And I think that is where Joanne is, even though she has been caged up her entire life as well, she knows that there's probably better things out there.
The fact that she still like considers like, oh, they could be rejoicing as well. Like, you know, they still have something to be happy about. Like, she doesn't know what it is because she's obviously not rejoicing herself. But the fact that there could be something to be happy about, I think maybe gives her hope for finding something. But then I think the sequence of these, like rejoicing or merely helloing, like it's generally like, okay, yeah, like, you know, she can do that too. She says hello to the bird keeper. Like, so she does kind of interact with other people, even if the interactions aren't as huge, but I'm sure for her it's a big deal to just be able to talk to someone else and have them respond to her. And then it says like, are you discussing or fussing? And I feel like those are things that she does not have the privilege of being able to do. Like, all her interactions are fairly short, even with the judge, as far as we can see. Like, he says something, she does it. She's not really allowed to talk back to him. They don't have like deep discussions or anything. Even if she like fusses with stuff, like nothing is going to change. Like, she can't do anything different. The way that the song structure works is like when she says, or simply dreaming, is when the song sort of like calms down a little. I feel like, again, depending on the interpretation, but I feel like it's almost her permission to like sort of dream about a life outside the cage and stuff, which is probably what she's been doing her whole life. But it's just like, she's seeing a kindred spirit of like, if they're also dreaming about life outside the cage, then like, yes, that is what I've been doing my entire time I've been here. And she feels sorry for them as well, I think, because they're in her same predicament and she knows what that's like and what it's like to not be able to leave. This is possibly also because like it's one of the few versions we can see close-ups of this number. But the way that Betsy Jocelyn does it in that tour video, when she says like, are you simply dreaming? Are you crowing? Are you screaming? Like, she has a different sort of expression for each one. Like, when she says, are you crowing? It's a little bit like, oh, that's so good. Like, that's great for you. Like, good job. And then she has this like, she's like, wait a second, like this like flash of horror before she's like, wait, are you screaming? Like, it's like, what's wrong?
Well, yeah. And it's true too. Like, if you've ever had like a pet or anything in your life too, it's like, oh, what are you thinking about? Right. when you talk to your animals. But I think this is kind of a similar thing here. It's like, we can't actually communicate on a voice to voice level and understand each other. So it's like, yeah, those noises you're making or those squeaks you're making, is that because you're happy or because you're like terrified? Like, it's hard to know sometimes. So she sings, ring dove and robinette, is it for wages? Singing to be sold. Have you decided it's safer in cages, singing when you're told? My cage has many rooms, damask and dark. Nothing there sings, not even my lark. Larks never will, you know, when they're captive. Teach me to be more adaptive. Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, teach me how to sing. If I cannot fly, let me sing.
My cage has many rooms, damask and dark. Nothing there sings, not even my lark. Larks never will, you know, when they're captive. Teach me to be more adaptive. Green finch and linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, teach me how to sing. If I cannot fly, let me sing.
Well, she changes the birds.
She does.
I don't know. Did you happen to look up these two birds?
I did. I mean, so the ring dove is specifically known for its cooing noise. Apparently, it's like the only bird that has a specific type of throat thing. Anyways, it was a huge long article I read on that. Right. But it's also one of the easiest birds to keep in captivity, apparently. So some have lived for as long as 29 years. just
Wow.
ring doves. And then the robinette is the European version of the North American robin. So it's just a smaller version of the same bird, which there's lots of folk stories told about these birds too, because they're just all over the place.
I guess that makes sense for like why she changes the birds in terms of singing for like, is it for wages? This also goes back to, again, she's there to be seen and not heard. The judge wanted to take care of her and he lusts after her in the, commonly cut Johanna too. But it's all, again, based on appearances. He doesn't care about her personality or anything. So if she wanted to be able to say something to be heard, she'd have to wait for someone to like tell her like, hey, it's okay to speak now. And also like, we don't know how abusive the judge is towards her outside of just like confinement and neglect. Like maybe she had tried to escape before and he caught her and, did horrible things to her.
Right.
But like, we really don't know. And in that 1982 portrayal, she seems terrified of him when he talks to her, like after he catches her with Anthony. And maybe that's just because she knows she's doing something she's not supposed to, or maybe it's because he's caught her doing something she wasn't supposed to before and like punished her for it. Like we really have no other clue about what their relationship is like.
There does seem to be a bit of trauma, not to reduce this too much, but some sort of like PTSD that's going on, because there's that song that happens later when they're both together, when he's singing Kiss Me. Was that the gate? Is that the gate? I think I heard the gate, right?
Yeah.
So it's like she is like on edge about any noise because she knows like if the judge comes home, like this is the end.
Yeah. And so that's what, when she's like, oh, it's safer in cages, singing when you're told. And this also reminds me a bit of Steps on the Palace from Into the Woods, because it is a little bit like do you choose the evil you know, or do you take a risk and leave and hope that whatever you leave for is something better? She knows basically the darkest parts of humanity, probably, or at least some of them. I mean, she's not the one like beheading people and making them into pies. But,
well, not that we know about, right?
Right, true. Like that could be a whole subplot that was totally taken out.
Sweeney Todd 2, Johanna's Revenge. Yeah, it'll be great.
She knows, like, and again, this is like the opposite of Anthony, who somehow is still naive. Like he's only seen the good parts of the world, but she knows like, okay, maybe sometimes it's better not to speak out. It's better to like stay in your place, to not attract attention, to make sure that you're able to fend for yourself and just do what people tell you to. And I think near the end, when they're escaping the asylum, because Anthony like threatens to shoot the asylum director and he can't bring himself to pull the trigger. Johanna like takes the gun from him and she's the one that ends up killing the asylum director. I think that's just like her moment of self-actualization where she's like, okay, I'm out of the cage now. Like I can actually do what, like if I do this one thing, I'll be free. Like there will be no one else to come after me. Like we'll be able to escape. She still trusts Anthony to like find them a safe place, I guess, which, like it's debatable whether that trust is earned or not.
I mean, if we're in the original production and a young Victor Garber came and said like, I want you to sail the world with me, I'm like, here's my coat, I'm putting it on, let's go.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, like I think it's interesting how, at least in this song, she's evolved from just like, how can you possibly sing in cages to like, maybe you're doing it to like bide your time, improve your situation. Is it for wages, singing to be sold? Like, and if they're being sold, you have no clue like whether their next master is going to be better or worse than their current situation. I mean, like Anthony buys her a bird and for a hot second, you think like, oh, this bird will be great. Like, Anthony's like a good guy and Johanna won't mistreat the bird, but then the bird literally gets its neck snapped by the beetle. So, you never really know what's going to happen next.
That's the interesting thing here too, because like the first half of the song is basically like, what are these birds singing about? They seem to be possibly happy, even though that they're in this terrible situation. And then this like second half is all about like, okay, I am in this terrible situation, so maybe I should just learn to be happy about it. Maybe I just, fake it until I make it and be like these birds and start singing and being happy. And maybe that'll change my situation here. I just find it so interesting. Like, teach me to be more adaptive, right? Like she's trying to figure out how she can be better with this. My cage has many rooms. So it's not like she's only stuck in one room. Like she has, I guess, the free reign of this whole place that they're living in, but still is a cage. She can't leave this place. And then, do you know what damask means by any chance?
It's a type of it's a type of fabric. The confusing thing about this, and this is like just purely grammatical, is it sounds like damask and dark are describing the rooms. But I think what it's supposed to be is I have a lot of rooms, a lot of damask, and a lot of darkness. Damask is not an adjective. Like, it's confusing the way it's said.
It is confusing because, so I don't know if this is what this is actually supposed to mean or not. And maybe write in, by the way, if you actually know 100%, like this is what they're referring to, because definitely I think Sondheim is leaning in more to like older Victorian English and words that might have been used a little bit more back then. You're right in saying that it is like the kind of your first definition if you type this in is like it's this type of linen. So I'm like, oh, okay, they're talking about like being under the covers or like you put it over top of a bird cage, right, and block out the sun so that they either go to sleep or stop making noise. But then I went a little bit more, and like the root word of that damask, it was like Damascene or something like that. Anyways, also is in reference to a way to ornament metal. So you're either etching it or inlaying it with gold specifically. I feel like you could read it in the fabric way, or it's like my rooms that I have here are much like the cage, like this beautiful cage that is like inlaid with gold and like been etched to look super, super nice. But still, again, still a cage that we're still in. Doesn't matter how nice the cage looks like. I'm still a prisoner here.
Yeah, I think that is like what she's trying to say is like it's an ivory tower essentially. Like she has a really nice cage, but it's still a cage, and it's still like, you know, it's dark. Nothing is illuminated metaphorically for her. Everything is just like wherever she looks, it's dark and dreary. Her only consolation is just being able to look outside. Like, at least she has a window, really.
Yeah.
and like, you know, she has multiple rooms, so she can at least sort of like, again, metaphorically stretch her wings, but she can't actually like take off.
You can do Pilates in the parlor. You can do this over there. Like, you have so much space in this townhouse in London.
It is just like really nice, but again, like she can't go anywhere else. She's confined.
I guess my biggest question here then, so the song ends, like I already said here, if I cannot fly, let me sing. So I know that she's like resigning herself, like, okay, if the rest of my life means like I can never leave this place, then I would rather sing. But what does she want to sing?
I think the idea there is like, it's her only method of defiance left. There's that sort of saying that's like, oh, the best revenge is living well, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, if I'm to be stuck here and I cannot do anything about it, I might as well sing, because what else can I do? Like, it's the only sort of, because like, you know, just in life in general, it's honestly exhausting to like hold a grudge or to be angry about something that you can't change. And so even if your situation sucks, if you find ways to live with it, it gets slightly better. So I think it's like her way of living with it. And again, when she goes to the asylum and they're like, she won't stop singing, I think that's also like the same thing where it's like, if I'm to be stuck here, I might as well do something that presumably makes her happy. But also, just to like backtrack a little, when she says like, teach me to be more adaptive, she does this sort of like cadenza almost after that, as if she's like trying to sing. And I guess I'll like, you know, ask you what you think about this, but it's interesting because like she does this little thing, but then it goes straight into like Green Finch and Linnet Bird again. Whereas I feel like it would be a more interesting choice if she like tried to sing and then like found either the notes were stuck or she couldn't, or like something like that, instead of being able to like sing and then, you know, continue that song.
Yeah. I wonder if like that's partly what that is supposed to represent, and it just doesn't really land 100%, because I do like that idea of like that bit of her doing vocalizations as her, you know, trying to find her voice somehow, and it's somehow getting stuck in her throat or something. Pause, finish the last 3 lines, sort of thing. That would be kind of an interesting way to stage it.
Yeah, like that was what first came to my mind when that happened. And I'm just surprised that like no one has done this as far as I've seen. But also to go back a little more. So I tried to look up whether or not larks actually can sing in captivity. And I found nothing about them
I couldn't either.
singing. But I did find that if they're raised in captivity, they're actually really good at mimicry. Like they copy the sounds around them, which I think is also interesting as far as, like being more adaptive. Like she doesn't mention that whole mimicry in the song, but she does mention like, let me be more adaptive. And her way of being more adaptive is not singing. It's let me learn how to sing, or let me like find ways to sing. So if she's like sort of mimicking the stuff around her, like she can probably see, like happy couples or just generally happy people on the street. So she's probably trying to like use that as a guide for how can I be happy as well in my current situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out here. I forgot to mention that larks are, I think them and ravens or something like that are like super good at like mimicking people's noises and almost voices and stuff like that too. So it's like, what a great bird to use in your analogy inside of this song. Yeah.
And also this is something that I saw from YouTube. Someone did a breakdown of this song, the score of this song. And they mentioned how when they're captive, teach me to be more adaptive. That's essentially almost the same melody as when Sweeney's singing Epiphany, like, and I'll never see Johanna.
Right.
And so it's interesting in that part too, specifically because he knows where Johanna is. And so he could, theoretically like go by her window and see her like Anthony did. But he's a little too caught up in his own misery and his own revenge plot that he doesn't even try to go see her. And again, and it's also like the greatest irony near the end when he does see her and has no clue who she is. Like he almost tries to kill her. So it's like if he were more adaptive, let's say, like he could find ways around that essentially. And especially once he knows that Denis like sort of in contact with her, he puts revenge over seeing his own daughter. Like even though that's theoretically what the revenge is for.
Yeah, he gets so caught up in the revenge itself that he loses sight for what he actually wants, which is family back. And he could have his family back, or what remains of his family.
Yeah. And at some point he had all his family in the same place at the same time. He just didn't know it because he was too caught up in his own grudges that he like didn't look closely, and that he wasn't paying attention to what was happening around him.
Well, this has been great. See, I every time I'm like, am I going to be able to fill an hour on Green Finch and Linnet Bird? And I sure did. So I guess for you then, when you think about this song and the whole score of Sweeney Todd, is it top 5, middle 5, bottom 5? Like, how does it rank for you?
I'd say near the middle, maybe like upper half of the middle, especially like once you dive into it. It is a very, when I was looking this up on Apple Music, because I was just trying to like listen to different interpretations of this. First of all, it's not included on the 2012 London cast recording. Like they do it in the show, but they were just like, this isn't important enough for us to record it on the cast recording, which was a little tragic. But I was also kind of surprised at how many people did record this that aren't necessarily like musical theater people or like opera people. Like Judy Collins has a version of this. Judy Collins known for Send in the Clowns. And I guess it is sort of a song that you can take out of context, but within the context, it does, like we just spent the last hour talking about, shed so many layers on who Johanna is and how she's making the best of her situation.
I do like there being some weird alternate history where this is the song that like breaks through and is like Song of the Year, Grammy Award, Green Finch and Linnet Bird.
Have every single soprano in the world recording this song and trying to sing it, or like the people who aren't sopranos taking it down. And I feel like this just doesn't hit the same if you're not a soprano though, because the point is to be in that same register that all the other birds are in, I think.
Yeah, you have to almost like that trill at the top end of your register. Yeah.
And so that's just like, you just have to be there. And if you're not, then I'm sorry. This song just doesn't work the same.
Right. This is the one that we want Tom Waits to cover.
Oh man, could you imagine? Yeah, I mean, I think I generally like this song. I think it's really fascinating to see what acting choices can be made with this song. I mean, at least the movie kept this in because they cut all of other Johanna songs. So they're like, we'll give her half a song. That's going to be good enough, right? And I think it does set her slightly apart from the traditional ingenue track. Like, I mean, it's the first time we see her. Another podcast I was listening to mentions like, hey, we actually get to meet both Anthony and Johanna separately before they fall in love with each other, which is unlike what we see in Les Mis, where it's basically like you meet them for 2 seconds, they have maybe 3 lines, and then they fall in love, and you're like, who are these people and why should we care? Like you said earlier, like, is she actually in love with Anthony? Who knows? It is her way of leaving, but if she has had like particularly violent or, experiences with the judge, she does need someone else's help to escape. And she sees Anthony and she's like, you are the one who helped me because you're obsessed with me.
Yeah, I can use this.
Yeah. And it's also interesting how this song is like, it's not even a real reprise. It's just like over the top of Ah Miss, where he, I feel like the way that she sings it is also slightly different, where I think she sees him by then and she's like, oh yes, these green finches and linnet birds, they can sing, but I have my ticket out.
Thank you so much, Christine. If people wanted to, see what you're up to, stay in contact with you, what's the best way to do so online?
Yeah, so my Twitter is Across the Arch. If you want to just hear more from me in general, I also have another Broadway podcast called Bottomless Broadway, which you can also follow on Twitter or Instagram at Bottomless Bway.
Excellent. One thing I've also been doing at the end of every episode this season is asking the question, what is your favorite kind of pie?
Favorite kind of pie? Ooh. Well, I do like chicken pot pie a lot, which is, a savory pie. And then for sweet pies, I feel like I have to separate these into 2 categories.
Sure.
Either apple or cherry. Yeah. Thanks again for having me on.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow at Sondheim Podcast on Twitter or Instagram, and you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network and to Park Power this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be talking about Ah Miss, a song that proves just how boring Anthony is. As always, a big thank you to Chris Taniguchi, who designed the artwork, and to Nick Driscoll, who composed our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.